Yo, what is up, YouTube? So there is no such thing as duality, and if there is no duality, then that means that there is no such thing as good and bad. Obviously, that's the main duality that we're constantly told about and given, and it's a very certain kind of worldview that we have, and it's very entrenched and ingrained in our society. And I'll tell you why there's no such thing as duality, and then we can kind of get more into the good versus bad. So there's no such thing as duality. An easy example of this is the opposite. Just think of different opposites that you have around you and that you have been taught in school and things like that. What is the opposite of 2, right? For example, with mathematics, the number 2, most people would probably say the opposite of number 2 is -2. And you would be right in the sense of mathematics, but the thing is that nature doesn't respond to mathematics, and in the physical world, 2 and -2 don't make any sense. Especially in the physical world, -2 doesn't make any sense because there cannot be anything that is a negative amount. Like, you can't lose 2 apples, right? So apples would be broken down in nature and turned into another form of whatever kind of carbon or whatever, and be broken down into the whole of nature, right? So there's no way to possibly kind of, like, I want to say own, but there's no way to possibly be able to hold a number of -2 apples, right? Because it would not only not exist, but it would negatively exist. It would exist outside of the system, and where would it be outside of nature? Which doesn't make any sense, right? Because this is the physical reality that we live in. There's no way to have a negative amount of anything, because it would be in a different realm, I guess you could say, but then that would still be the whole of our physical realm and this reality that we're in. So basically just with that alone, you can already tell that we're going to run into some problems with duality, but that is just simply one example. Another example is the opposite of a man. What is the opposite of a man? Most people would say, right, very straightforward answer would be a woman. But the opposite of a man or the opposite of a woman would not be the other. There's no such thing as an opposite of a man. There is only a man. And he exists in this reality and in the physical realm. And the opposite of a man can't be a woman, because if you actually compare them, there's a lot more similarities than most people would probably like to admit or think. And really, a lot of the main differences are our hormones in our bodies, right? So the opposite of a man would be nothing, but even that wouldn't make sense, because the opposite of nothing is everything, right? So I guess that's actually kind of a good point. What's the opposite of nothing? Nothing would be everything, but there's no way to have nothing, though. So nothing doesn't even exist, right? So the opposite of everything, which is everything that is in our physical world, would be nothing, but there's no way to have nothing. So I guess it's one that I didn't really think about. That's kind of cool to think about. But that proves also that there is no duality, because nothing literally can't exist, because there's always something in our physical world. And then if you want to say, well, I think that there might be a realm or an existence where there is nothing, well, if that was true, first off, that's a concept that you made in your head, and there's no way for you to prove that. There's no way to really I mean, we could all run with that idea and, you know, think over it in our own heads and whatever, but there's no way to physically prove that, because, well, first off, it would be nothing. Second off, we live in this physical world and on this plane, and we haven't ever experienced anything outside of this reality, right? So yeah, that's actually really interesting. And also, there would still not be nothing, because there would always be something, because what something is all around us, and we already have that, whether you go into different dimensions or not. Those other dimensions that you are not in when you are in the nothing dimension would still exist, but also you would be in that nothing dimension, and the only way for you to experience that would be through your physical body, or I guess if you had a soul and you were there, which that is a topic that I'm probably not going to discuss too much because I don't really know if we do have a soul or not. So, but I haven't really thought about that one too much. But yeah, so if there is, yeah, so it's impossible to have nothing. So that's another really good example. And then now, since we kind of went down that tangent, really got into that, I guess we can now talk about why there is no such thing as good or bad. So we've pretty much already broken down that there is no duality, and if there is no duality in our physical realm like here and in nature, then obviously there's no good and bad, because we've already broken down the fact that there isn't duality. But let's say we didn't go through all that part in the beginning, and reasons why good and bad can't exist. So the reason why good and bad can't exist is because, for one, all cultures in the world have different, and societies have different ideas of what is good and bad. For example, and this is going to be more of an extreme case, so in Islamic countries, something good or okay to do sometimes is to stone women who, let's say, are honor killings and things like that. I don't think I really need to go into too much detail. If you want to know more about this and understand it better, you can look it up yourself. But in their societies, or in certain societies, that's okay to do. In America, that is completely, or in the Western society, that is completely not okay to do. And under no circumstances would that ever be allowed. But according to them, in the Middle East, that is okay to do. Another thing with the Middle East versus the West, a lot of things in the Middle East are haram. I'm not sure if I'm really saying that correctly, but basically you can't do a lot of things like it's bad, like listening to music, things like that, smoking, drinking. I don't know if coffee is included in that. I know tea isn't, even though tea has caffeine also, but coffee I think might be included in that. And then also having premarital intercourse is also included in that as well too. And probably looking at women and objectifying them, I would imagine, at least out in the open and openly talking about it with another man, is probably haram, because they usually say it to each other, as far as I know. I'm not Middle Eastern, but or Islamic. So that's just kind of one example. And I would say, kind of expanding off of that, who decides what is good and bad? And are there different levels of good and bad? So for example, if someone does something good, is there like, I feel like a lot of people too in their head would have like different levels of what is good, like that someone does, or something that is bad. So for example, someone ends up doing something terrible, like killing someone or whatever. Is that worse than someone stealing? Is it not? A lot of people would probably say that it is worse than stealing, but who is the judge of all of these different levels and all of these different varying degrees and levels of what is considered good and bad, and who decides these type of things? I think is also another question that you really need to bring up to yourself in order to kind of question whether this actually exists. Is like, who's deciding what is good and bad, first off, and who is deciding what different levels are good and bad? Even though I think a lot of people don't really probably break it down and think in that way about it, like, oh well, if it's good then it is good, and if it's bad it is bad. There's no really reason to break it down too much and think about it, but I think it is something to consider. I think I had, so different cultures. I wrote something on here about half-truths are lies. I guess that kind of is like a gray area. So some people would consider that lying, but other people would consider it not lying. And at what point, because we know, well, most people would say it is bad to lie, but at what point is it bad to half lie, and at what point is it a lie and like a full-blown lie and a half lie? But if you half lie, it says in the Bible, at least as far as I know, that half lying is still sinning, and it's not a good thing. But are you obliged to tell everyone all of the truth about everything? And do they even want to hear all of it? Right? Do they even need to hear it all? So these different types of questions like this come in, and it's really ends up becoming like a really awkward thing, right? So